The air in my late father's study was thick, with the scent of old leather and feigned grief. My sister, Clara, clutched a pearl necklace, her eyes smugly dry. My brother, Thomas, leaned against the mahogany desk, a shark's grin playing on his lips. They thought this was their victory lap. For months, they'd poisoned our father's mind against me, the black sheep who'd built his own firm in Boston. They'd whispered lies and celebrated what they believed was their masterstroke, writing me, Arthur Vance, completely out of the family will. I watched them, letting the silence hang. They had no idea the real will, the final and binding testament, was locked in my briefcase, and I was its sole executor. Clara finally broke the silence, her voice dripping with saccharine pity. "Arthur, darling, we're so glad you could make it, even under the circumstances." She was the family's socialite, a woman who treated charity galas like corporate takeovers, and believed our family name was a currency she alone should control. Her entire life was a performance, and today was her grand finale. Thomas scoffed, pushing off the desk. "Cut the act, Clara. He's here for the reading. Probably needs the cash, what with that little Boston firm of his." My brother, the self-proclaimed heir apparent, had ridden our father's coattails his entire life, mistaking nepotism for business acumen. He viewed my self-made success not as an achievement, but as a personal insult to the family legacy he felt entitled to. They saw me as a stray dog, hoping for scraps from the table. "Actually," I said, my voice dangerously calm as I placed my briefcase on the polished mahogany with a solid, definitive sood. The sound cut through their condescension. "I'm here to conduct the reading." Their smiles didn't just falter, they evaporated. For the first time all morning, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in their eyes. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow, not of some distant childhood squabble, but of my father's last lucid day, 6 months ago. He had summoned me to his private study, the very room where we now stood. He wasn't the frail, confused man Clara and Thomas had been describing in their crocodile-tear phone calls. His eyes, though weary, were as sharp as cut glass. "They think I'm a fool, Arthur," he'd rasped, his hand trembling slightly as he gestured towards the door. "They circle like vultures, whispering about power of attorney, about my, quote, declining state. They talk to me like I'm a piece of furniture they're about to appraise." This rift hadn't started when I left for Boston. It started 20 years ago when I refused to join the family firm. I saw my father's genius being leached away by Thomas's reckless spending and Clara's obsession with social climbing. I told him the company was bloated, that its foundation was rotting with entitlement. He'd called me a traitor then. My siblings had called me a disgrace. So I left, built my own firm from nothing, and proved my methods worked. It seems my father had finally come to see the truth. "Thomas sees the family name as a blank check," my father had continued, his voice gaining strength. "And Clara sees it as a tiara. They don't see the sweat, the risk, the legacy. You do. You ran from it, but you respected it enough to build your own." He pushed a heavy sealed envelope across the desk. "This is my real will, the only will. Their lawyer has a decoy, a lovely piece of fiction. I've allowed them to help orchestrate. Let them have their little performance. Let them believe they've won." He looked me dead in the eye, the weight of his life's work passing between us in that gaze. "They want to gut this family for parts, Arthur. I am making you the sole executor and trustee of the Vance Trust. It won't be a gift, it'll be a war. You will not be distributing an inheritance. You will be defending a legacy from my own children. Can you do that for me?" I remembered my own voice, low and steady. "I can." It was a promise, a burden I accepted not for a share of the wealth they so desperately craved, but for the man who, in his final act, saw me for who I truly was. Now, looking at their pale, slack-jawed faces, I felt the chill of that promise settle over me. The war had just been declared, and they had no idea they were already surrounded. I snapped open the latches on my briefcase, The metallic clicks echoed in the suffocating silence. Thomas found his voice first, a strangled, indignant croak. "What is this, Arthur? Some kind of joke? A forgery? Our lawyer has the will, notarized and filed." "Your lawyer," I corrected him, pulling out the heavy cream-colored envelope sealed with our father's personal signet ring, "has a beautifully crafted piece of fiction. A document Father allowed you to influence to make you feel clever. He wanted to see how far you'd go." I broke the seal with my thumb, the sound like a cracking bone. "This," I said, holding up the document, "is the last will and testament of Edward Vance, signed 3 months ago, witnessed by his doctor and his oldest friend, and notarized by a judge. It revokes all previous versions." Clara's face was a mask of disbelief. "No, he was confused. He wasn't well. You took advantage of him." "On the contrary," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "He was never more clear." I scanned the first page. I'll skip the preamble and get to the relevant appointments. "I hereby name my son, Arthur Vance, as the sole executor of my estate and sole trustee of the Vance Family Trust." Thomas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Trustee? Over what? We wrote you out, remember? There's nothing in the trust for you to manage." "That's where you're mistaken," I replied, turning a page. "You see, Father didn't disinherit me. He put me in charge of your inheritance." I looked directly at my brother. "Let's start with you, Thomas. Per Article 4, the Thomas Vance Competency Clause, you will not be receiving a lump sum. Instead, you will be appointed CEO of the family's original manufacturing subsidiary, Vance Fabrication." A flicker of pride crossed his face before I continued. "Your salary will be set at market rate, no bonuses. You have 5 years to make the subsidiary profitable, with a minimum 10% year-over-year growth. You will submit quarterly financial reports directly to me, the trustee, for auditing. If you succeed, after 5 years, the board, which I will appoint, will vote on whether you can access a larger portion of your trust fund. If you fail, or if I find any financial misconduct, your interest in the trust is terminated and liquidated, with all proceeds going to the MIT School of Engineering Scholarship Fund." His face went from ruddy to ashen. "You're joking. That division hasn't turned a profit in 20 years. "Then you'd better be the business genius you've always claimed to be," I said, not looking up. "Now, Clara." My sister straightened her spine, a desperate, haughty defiance in her eyes. "You can't touch me, Arthur. My shares are mine." "Not quite," I said softly. Article 5, the Clara Vance Legacy Clause. Your access to trust dividends is now conditional. Your monthly stipend is contingent on you performing a minimum of 40 hours of documented, hands-on volunteer work at one of 3 charities. I paused for effect. A soup kitchen in Dorchester, a public housing cleanup initiative in Roxbury, or the pediatric oncology ward at Mass General. Your choice. The charity director will report your hours and performance to me." The color drained from her face. She looked like she might be sick. "Furthermore," I added, delivering the final blow, "the clause contains a, quote, reputation addendum. Any public behavior deemed by the trustee to bring scandal or disrepute upon the Vance family name will result in an immediate and permanent forfeiture of your entire claim. The funds will be redirected to a charity of my choosing." I folded the document and placed it precisely in the center of the desk. I looked at their shattered expressions, the smirks and smugness replaced by raw, primal panic. They weren't heirs anymore. They were supplicants. "You wanted to write me out of the will," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Instead, you wrote yourselves into my ledger. You—" The silence stretched, thin and brittle, before it shattered. It was Clara who broke first, a strangled gasp escaping her lips before it morphed into a venomous hiss. "You monster! she whispered, the words trembling with a fury that made her carefully constructed mask of grief crack and fall away. You did this. You twisted him, poisoned him against his own family in his final days. This isn't legacy, it's cruelty. This isn't what Daddy would have wanted. I met her gaze, my own expression unreadable. Father wanted results, Clara. He was tired of funding a lifestyle. This is his final investment, in your character. That was the cue for Thomas. He lunged forward, not at me, but at the desk, slamming both palms down flat. The sound boomed through the study like a gunshot. His face was purple with rage, a vein throbbing in his temple. You will not get away with this, Arthur. This is a sham, a forgery. I'll have a team of lawyers tear this piece of paper and your life apart. You manipulated a dying man. I didn't flinch. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply tapped a finger on the document. Threaten all you like, Thomas. This will was reviewed by Judge Miller himself. Father's physician, Dr. Evans, signed an affidavit confirming his sound mind and body on the day of signing. Your lawyers will find this document is ironclad, and every dollar you spend fighting it will be your own, not the estate's. I'd advise you to check your account balance before you start retaining counsel. I pushed a single, separate sheet of paper across the desk towards each of them. An addendum. These are your starting instructions. Clara, you have 72 hours to inform my office of your chosen charity. Your first 40-hour block must be completed by the end of the month to receive your next stipend. Thomas, your first official day as CEO of Vance Fabrication is Monday. I expect a preliminary business plan on my desk by Friday. Don't be late. Quote, I methodically placed the will back into my briefcase, the clicks of the latches sounding like the closing of a coffin lid. Their coffin. I walked towards the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. You're right about one thing, I said, turning to look at them one last time. Their faces a portrait of impotent rage and dawning horror. This isn't about what you wanted. It was never supposed to be. They were trapped, not by me, but by the weight of their own greed, now forged into a cage by the very man they sought to betray. My promise to my father was being kept. The war wasn't over, but the opening battle was a decisive, brutal victory. I left them standing in the wreckage of their expectations. The drive from the family estate to the downtown Boston headquarters of Vance Holdings was a 40-minute exercise in controlled fury. I wasn't angry at my siblings' predictable outrage. I was angry at the rot they had been allowed to foster for 2 decades. The wood-paneled boardroom on the top floor was the heart of that decay, a chamber where my father's vision had been slowly exsanguinated by Thomas's ego and Clara's vanity. They thought the battle was in the courts. They were wrong. The real war was for control of the engine room, and I was about to seize the ship's helm. I bypassed the executive receptionist, a woman who'd known me since I was a teenager and now looked at me like a ghost. I didn't need her to announce me. My destination was the office of Richard Sterling, the company's general counsel and a longtime board member. He was a man who prized stability above all else, which, in recent years, had made him an unwilling accomplice to my siblings' mismanagement. I found him staring out his corner office window, a cup of coffee held loosely in his hand. He turned as I entered, his face etched with a weary concern that told me the news from the estate had already reached him. Arthur, he said, his voice a low rumble. I've just had a rather frantic call from Thomas. He's making some wild accusations. Are they? I asked, closing the door behind me. Or is he just now realizing the consequences of his actions? I didn't wait for an answer. As of 90 minutes ago, I am the sole trustee of the Vance Family Trust. You know as well as I do, Richard, that the trust holds 51% of the voting shares in this company. I want an emergency board meeting. In 1 hour. Quote, Sterling blinked, the full implication of my statement landing on him. He wasn't my father's man or my siblings' man. He was the company's man. And the company was now unequivocally me. An emergency meeting? On what grounds? On the grounds that the leadership is compromised, I stated flatly. There are 2 members of this board who have actively conspired to defraud an estate and who have a vested personal interest in undermining the authority of the new trustee. Their positions are untenable. I'm cleaning house, today. An hour later, I sat at the head of the long mahogany table in the chair that had been my father's. The air was thick with hostility. Across from me sat a grim-faced Richard Sterling. To my right were 2 of Thomas's cronies, Marcus Thorne, a slick executive who ran the acquisitions department like his personal slush fund, and Arthur Vance, my aunt, my father's sister, a woman who had always enabled Clara's worst impulses in exchange for a seat at the table and a steady flow of dividends. They looked at me with open contempt. Marcus spoke first, his voice oozing condescension. "Arthur, this is highly irregular. Thomas has informed us he is challenging the validity of this supposed will. Until the courts have settled the matter, you have no authority here." "My authority," I said, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, "comes from a legally binding document that grants me fiduciary control over the majority of this company's shares. Your personal opinion, and Thomas's for that matter, are irrelevant. The challenge he's mounting will fail, but I'm not waiting for that. We're making changes now." I slid 2 envelopes across the table, one in front of Marcus, one in front of my aunt. "Effective immediately, I am exercising the trust's right to call a shareholder vote. I vote to remove Marcus Thorne and Arthur Vance from the board of directors. As I control 51% of the shares, the motion passes." The silence was absolute. Eleanor's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Marcus's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "You can't do that," he sputtered. "I just did," I replied, my gaze as cold as a winter sea. "Your services are no longer required. Your corporate accounts have been frozen, and security will escort you from the building. You have 10 minutes to collect your personal belongings." My aunt finally found her voice, a shrill, wounded cry. "After all I did for this family? For your father?" "My father is the reason I'm doing this," I shot back, my patience gone. "You stood by and watched my brother drive 2 divisions into the ground, and my sister treat the company coffers like an ATM. You didn't serve the family. You served yourselves. Now you're out." I turned to Sterling, who was watching the scene unfold with a kind of horrified awe. "Richard, as my first act, I am appointing 2 new board members. Their names are in the file in front of you. One is the dean of the business school I graduated from. The other is the sharpest forensic accountant in New England. They have already accepted. Our first official meeting is tomorrow at 9 a.m. The first item on the agenda will be a full, independent audit of every department, starting with acquisitions." Marcus Thorne went pale. He knew what an audit would find. As if on cue, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Clara. "Sarge Just I. You are destroying this family. Daddy would be ashamed." I glanced at the text, then back at the 2 disgraced board members being quietly flanked by security guards who had entered the room. I typed a simple reply to my sister, one I knew would be screenshotted and sent to Thomas within seconds. "Neiper, the family business is now under new management. Get used to it." I stood up, leaving the chaos to settle behind me. I had cut off their power at its source. I had severed the arteries that fed their influence and their arrogance. This wasn't just about enforcing a will. It was about performing an amputation to save the patient. They had wanted a war of whispers and lawyers. I had just fired the first cannon shot, not at them, but at the very foundation of their power, and it had crumbled in less than an hour. The clean sweep of the boardroom was only the beginning. I spent the next 48 hours in my father's office, which now felt less like a museum and more like a war room. The scent of leather was now mixed with the bitter aroma of strong coffee. I wasn't just occupying the space, I was repurposing it. The first report from my newly appointed forensic accountant, a sharp-eyed woman named Davies, landed on my desk with a quiet thud. It was a preliminary review of Marcus Thorne's acquisitions department, It was even worse than I'd imagined. "It's a classic kickback scheme, Mr. Vance," Davies explained over the phone, her voice crisp and professional. "Thorne and your brother would identify an asset for acquisition. Thorne would create a shell corporation to purchase it first. Then Vance Holdings would acquire it from the shell company at an inflated price, sometimes by as much as 40%. The difference was funneled into an offshore account." She paused. "So far, I've traced over $9 million siphoned off in the last 3 years alone. The funds were used for, among other things, a down payment on Thomas's villa in the Caribbean and the financing of Clara's last 2 charity galas." My knuckles were white on the receiver. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was systematic theft. They were parasites, bleeding the company dry to fund their fantasies. "Keep digging, Ms. Davies," I said, my voice dangerously level. "I want a full report, evidence compiled for the district attorney. Don't miss a single dollar." I hung up. This was the rot my father spoke of. And my siblings weren't just complicit, they were the architects. My thoughts were interrupted by a call from the plant manager at Vance Fabrication, a gruff lifer named Henderson. "He's here," Henderson grunted. No preamble needed. Showed up in his Porsche, wearing a suit that cost more than my car, strutting around like he's inspecting a prize racehorse. I could picture it perfectly. Thomas, stepping out of his bubble and into the grimy reality of the business he'd allowed to decay. "What did he say?" I asked. "Demanded to see the books, said he was going to quote, streamline operations. I told him the books are being sent directly to your office from now on, per your instructions." He asked where his executive office was. I showed him the foreman's old office, the one with the leaky window and the cracked linoleum. He didn't seem pleased. There was a hint of grim satisfaction in Henderson's voice. Said he'd have a full revitalization plan by Friday. I think the reality of what that means is just starting to hit him. "This place needs a miracle, Mr. Vance, not a prince in a fancy suit." "He's not a prince anymore, Henderson," I said. "He's an employee. Report any deviations from his mandate directly to me." An hour later, my sister called. Her voice was a controlled shriek, the sound of a queen being forced to scrub her own floors. "I've made my choice, Arthur," she spat. "The pediatric oncology ward. I'll be seen to be doing something respectable." "You won't be seen doing anything, Clara," I corrected her. "The clause is explicit. This isn't a photo op. You will be cleaning rooms, reading to sick children, fetching coffee for exhausted parents. You will report to the volunteer coordinator, a woman named Sharon, who has been fully briefed on the terms of the will. She will not tolerate lateness, excuses, or any hint of your usual condescension. She will sign off on your hours personally. And Clara?" "What?" she hissed. "Remember the reputation addendum. One selfie. One call to a gossip columnist. One instance of you treating this like a performance, and your trust fund becomes a donation to the hospital. Permanently." Quote. The silence on the other end of the line was more satisfying than any screaming match. She hung up without another word. I leaned back in my father's chair, the leather groaning under my weight. The board was clean. The audit was in motion. Thomas was walking the factory floor of his own failure, and Clara was about to discover what real work felt like. They saw my actions as a personal, vindictive attack. They couldn't be more wrong. This wasn't my revenge. This was natural justice. For years their choices had no consequences. They lived in a world of endless credit, insulated by my father's wealth and power. They had written checks against a future they felt they were owed, never once thinking the bank would call in the debt. Well, the bill was due. My father had named me the collector. 3 weeks later, the reports started coming in, not to my father's office, but to mine in Boston. I was managing the empire from my own turf. The first call was from Henderson at Vance Fabrication. "We have a problem," he said, his voice grim. "Your brother decided to fired a senior maintenance engineer, a guy named Pete. Said his salary was bloated. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Let me guess. Pete was the only one who knew how to service the main stamping press. You got it. The press went down yesterday. Production is at a standstill. Getting a specialized crew out here will cost us a week of downtime and $100,000. Easy. More than Pete's salary for 2 years. Thomas, he's locked himself in his office. I think it's the first time in his life he's realized he can make a mistake he can't buy his way out of. It was a failure so predictable it was almost boring. A textbook case of hubris. But the next call was anything but. It was from Sharon, the volunteer coordinator at the hospital. I expected a complaint. Instead, her voice was different. Something happened with Clara today, she began slowly. A little boy she was reading to. Leo, he had a seizure. It was bad. Alarms, nurses rushing in. I expected her to run, to be disgusted. Most new volunteers do. She paused. She didn't. She stayed. After they took Leo, she just sat with his mother in the hallway, didn't say much, just sat with her while she cried. She even missed her break to do it. I was silent. This wasn't part of the plan. Punishment was easy to script. Humanity was not. I don't know what you're doing, Mr. Vance, Sharon said quietly, but for the first time, I think she saw a world that didn't revolve around her. It rattled her. In a good way, I think. I hung up the phone and stared out at the Boston skyline. Thomas's failure brought me no joy, only a weary sense of confirmation. But Clara's small act of empathy, that was different. It was the first unexpected return on my father's riskiest investment. It wasn't about the money or the power. It was about this. A flicker of light in the rot. A moral victory, small and fragile, but more valuable than the entire estate. And for the first time, I felt the crushing weight of my father's true ambition. He didn't want to ruin them. He wanted to save them. Now that I'm in complete control of the will they tried to cut me out of, I have to ask, would you give them a taste of their own medicine? Or would you be the bigger person and still give them a share?